The collapse of Lehman Brothers on 15 September last year triggered what many term as the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. 1 year later, as we approach the anniversary of Lehman's bankruptcy, the global economy is already on the road to recovery. So what has this crisis meant? What are the challenges ahead and what are the lessons that we've learned? That's the topic on Road to Recovery this week. I'm Shweta Rajpal-Kohli. With me here in the studio, Mr. C.M. Vasudev, former Economic Affairs Secretary and also Executive Director at the World Bank. Also with me, Dr. Amit Mitra. He's, of course, Secretary General of FICCI. And also joining me on a live link, noted economist, Professor Bibek Debroy. Thank you all for being with us here on the show. Let me start our discussion by bringing in Professor Bibek Debroy. Clearly, this crisis will perhaps go down in records as the worst since the Great Depression, but perhaps a very, very distant second, given that recovery seems to have set in sooner than expected.
Yes, of course, but I think comparisons with the Great Depression are somewhat unwarranted, because what has happened certainly in the real sector is by no means comparable to what had happened during the Great Depression. I think the critical issue is that different governments have reacted differently. We have seen a lot of state intervention in many of the developed countries. We have seen what is almost quasi-nationalization.
Right.
What has still not been determined, and that is an opportunity missed in some sense, is what is the alternative? What ought to be the content of regulation? The content of regulation is the most important issue that emerged as a result of this, but we still don't have consensus. Probably we aren't going to have consensus on what should be the content of that domestic regulation.
All right, so Dr. Mitra, an important point there. Perhaps we have recovered with a lot of help from government intervention, as Professor Debroy was saying, but the key point is that we haven't perhaps got to the root of this crisis.
Well, that's partly true, but let me say the extent is very interesting. The IMF estimate shows that this year, US economy will shrink by 2.6%.
Right.
Japan by 6%, Germany by 6%. But the silver lining is that for next year's projections, US economy turns around more or less 0.9% growth, which means rather shrinking only by 0.9%. They're all shrinking next year.
But not by
that quantum. And on the question that Professor Debroy raised on Great Depression, it's absolutely not comparable. Great Depression had 30% unemployment, 80% fall in investment, rate of investment in the United States. So the question that you're raising on what to do now, I'm little concerned that those guys who brought this about with the Lehman Brothers, with essentially derivatives and all these instruments that we don't understand normally,
right.
Those guys are not dead. They're going to sit in Connecticut in beautiful homes and bring new instruments. Will the regulator be able to catch them and be with them and be ahead of them? That's the question Professor Debroy is raising. And I'm raising the same concern that we need a new architecture, perhaps.
And what is that architecture, Mr. Vasudev, if I could ask you? Everybody seems to be talking about the post-Lehman world, a new financial architecture, but no one seems to have clear answers on what that architecture really should be.
Yeah, because the solution is not that simple. One has to be very careful to see that you do not throw the baby outside with the bathwater, so to say. Because innovation in financial products is something which has done a lot of good to the global economy and Indian economy also. But what really happened was that all these products were creating money in a way, or a quasi-money, and the central bank or the sovereign governments whose job it is really to see how much money should be created were not aware of how much new money was being created. So as Amit is, I think, probably right in saying that you need a new architecture, you need regulations. Regulators have to be little ahead of these financial engineers, so to say.
Tubar.com,